They told you if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and played by the rules, you'd retire with dignity. That was a lie. And over 1 million people just found out the hard way. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, because what we're diving into today will affect everyone watching, whether you're just starting your career or counting down to retirement. 1.2 million jobs gone in a single year, not during a recession, not during a pandemic, right now, in what they're calling a strong economy. And if you think that's just bad luck or normal market fluctuations, wait until you hear who's getting hit the hardest. It's not entry-level workers. It's not recent grads struggling to find their footing. It's the people with 20, 30, even 40 years of experience. The ones who did everything right. They're being erased from the workforce, and most of them will never financially recover. Meanwhile, 40% of older Americans have essentially nothing saved for retirement. Nothing. While experts casually say you need over $1 million just to retire comfortably, this isn't random. This isn't an accident. There's a pattern, a system. And once you see how it works, you'll never look at your job the same way again. Because what's happening to older workers right now? It's a preview of what's coming for everyone. Your loyalty means nothing. Your experience is a target on your back. And the retirement you were promised? It's already been sold off for parts. So buckle up. We're about to expose how an entire generation got betrayed, and why you might be next. Let's get into it. Okay, so layoffs happen, right? Companies downsize. The economy shifts. People get new jobs. That's the story we're sold. But let me hit you with some facts that'll make you rethink everything. In the past 12 months, job cuts in the US blew past 1.2 million positions. That's the kind of number you usually see during economic meltdowns. Think 2008 financial crisis vibes. Except, we're not in a recession. At least not officially. So what gives? Here's the thing. If you're young and you lose your job, it sucks. No question. But you've got time. You can pivot, retrain, start over. But if you're in your 50s or 60s, that math changes fast. Studies tracking workers over the past decade found something chilling. Nearly 1 in 4 older Gen X workers who lost their jobs stayed unemployed or underemployed for years afterward. Not weeks, not months, years. And many, they never made it back to their previous salary, ever. Now, you might think, well, maybe they just couldn't keep up with the times. Wrong. This isn't about capability. It's about calculation. Because here's what happens when you cross a certain age in the job market. The rules quietly change. Suddenly, interviews take forever. Callbacks slow to a crawl. That impressive resume with 20 years of experience? Employers start seeing dollar signs instead of value. They worry they'll have to actually pay you what you're worth. And unlike when you're 25 and living with roommates eating ramen, older workers don't have a safety net. They've got mortgages, kids in college, aging parents who need care. One layoff doesn't just interrupt their paycheck. It detonates the final stretch where they're supposed to build their retirement savings. This isn't just about losing a job. It's about losing timing. Because in our current system, retirement security depends almost entirely on uninterrupted income. You need those last high-earning years. You need your 401k to keep growing. You need time. And when a layoff hits in your 50s, that time evaporates. It's like being 1 mile from the finish line of a marathon, and someone just moves the finish line 10 miles further away. No warning, no explanation, just good luck, and that's where our story really begins. Let's rewind for a second. Because to understand how we got here, you need to know what work used to look like in America. For most of the 20th century, there was this unwritten deal between workers and companies. Super simple. You give us your time, your loyalty, your best years. We give you stability, raises, and a path to retirement. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. After World War II, staying with one company for 10, 15, even 30 years, that wasn't weird. That was the goal. You climbed the ladder. Your paycheck grew with your seniority. And when you finally hung up your hat at 65, you got a pension, a guaranteed monthly check for the rest of your life. Retirement wasn't a gamble, it was a promise. Now, that world is gone. Today's average worker stays at a company for less than 5 years. 5 years. Long careers at one place? They still exist, but only for a tiny group of workers, usually the ones in roles that can't be easily outsourced or automated. For everyone else, it's lateral moves, short contracts, and constant job hunting. But here's what makes this shift so brutal. The old benefits were built for the old system. Pensions, seniority-based pay, employer health coverage, all of that was designed around workers who'd stick around for decades. When people started job hopping, often because they had to, not because they wanted to, those systems collapsed. Companies stopped offering pensions. They stopped rewarding loyalty. They stopped designing benefits for the long haul. Why would they? You're probably leaving in 3 years anyway. And this is where it gets personal. Because millions of workers entered the job market under the old rules. They believed in the promise. They stayed loyal. They worked hard. And then, decades later, they woke up and realized the rules had been rewritten while they weren't looking. The company they gave 25 years to, it doesn't care. The pension they were counting on, it's gone, replaced by a 401k they barely understood. The career ladder, more like a treadmill that just got unplugged. It's like showing up to a game where everyone agreed to play chess and halfway through your opponent starts playing poker and acts like you're the one who's confused. No warning, no consent, just new rules. And if you can't keep up, well, that's your problem. Quick pause. If this is blowing your mind right now, do me a favor. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me if you've seen this happening at your job or with people you know. Because here's the thing. This isn't just happening to some abstract group of older workers. This is happening to our parents, our mentors, our future selves. And the more we talk about it, the harder it becomes to ignore. All right, let's keep going, because we need to talk about how retirement was literally invented. And trust me, this part is wild. Okay, mind-blowing fact time. Retirement is a modern invention. For most of human history, there was no such thing as stopping work at 65 and chilling. You worked until your body gave out. Then you relied on family, or you just died. Dark, I know, but that was reality. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people worked on farms or in family trades. When you got older, you'd transition to lighter tasks. Your kids would take over the heavy lifting. No gold watch, no retirement party, just a gradual fade into elder status supported by the household economy. But then factories happened. Work moved out of homes and into industrial spaces. And suddenly, older workers were stuck. The economy demanded physical endurance, long hours, repetitive labor, brutal conditions. And there was no exit plan. You either kept up or you were out of luck. By the early 1900s, a few big companies started experimenting with private pensions, basically promising workers a small income if they survived long enough and stayed loyal. But these were rare, sketchy, often unreliable. By 1930, fewer than 5% of elderly Americans had any retirement income. Most people just worked until they literally couldn't anymore. So here's the key insight. Retirement wasn't created as a gift. It was created as a solution. Policymakers and business leaders realized that an aging workforce was becoming a problem. People were too worn out to work but had no way to survive without working. It was a crisis. So they built a system, Social Security, pensions, mandatory retirement ages, and it worked. For a while. But here's the part they don't teach in history class. If retirement had to be invented once to solve a systemic problem, it can just as easily be dismantled when the system decides it doesn't need it anymore. And guess what? That dismantling already happened. We just didn't notice because it happened slowly, quietly, over decades. And that's what set the stage for the crisis we're living through right now. All right, let's talk about the one moment in history when retirement actually lived up to the hype. Post-World War II America, the economy was booming. Wages were rising. Productivity gains were being shared with workers, not just executives. And for the first time ever, regular working-class people could realistically imagine not working until they died. Wild, right? But even then, retirement wasn't universally loved. Surveys from the 1950s showed that fewer than half of workers in their early 60s even wanted to retire. Almost 90% opposed mandatory retirement at 65. People thought retirement should be reserved for those who were too sick or injured to keep working. So companies and the government had to sell it. They launched whole campaigns to rebrand old age. Retirement became dignity, leisure, earned rest. Companies created pre-retirement education programs, teaching workers how to manage money, navigate healthcare, and find purpose after work. Defined benefit pensions and Social Security provided predictable income, and for a brief shining moment, it worked. Millions of Americans retired with stability, with autonomy, with actual security. The golden years weren't a myth. They were real. But here's the thing about golden windows. They don't stay open forever. This whole system depended on three things: sustained economic growth, shared prosperity, profits going to workers, not just shareholders, companies that valued long-term employment, and once those conditions started eroding, the promise crumbled, the golden window closed, and everyone who came after was left chasing a version of retirement that no longer had the infrastructure to support it. We were sold a dream, but somebody dismantled the foundation while we were sleeping. Okay, we've arrived at the part of the story where things get really infuriating. Because the collapse of retirement didn't happen by accident. It happened because of very specific, very deliberate policy changes. Let's talk pensions. For most of the 20th century, pensions were the backbone of retirement. Super straightforward. Work for a company long enough, and they guaranteed you a monthly check for life. The risk was on them, not you. That model? Basically extinct now. Between 1980 and 2008, participation in traditional pensions dropped from 38% to just 20%. And what replaced them? The 401k. Now, the 401k was sold as an upgrade. Flexibility, control, ownership. But here's what they didn't tell you. Flexibility without stability is just exposure. With a 401k, all the risk shifted to you. Market crashes? Your problem. Bad timing? Your problem. Living longer than expected? Your problem. You need uninterrupted employment, rising wages, favorable markets, and the discipline to invest correctly for 40 years straight. Miss any of those? Your retirement math collapses. And if you miss several of them, retirement stops being a plan and becomes a desperate hope. Meanwhile, the goalposts kept moving. Experts now say you need over $1 million to retire comfortably. $1 million. And most people, they're nowhere close. So when layoffs hit late in your career, it's not just losing a job. It's losing the final years when your savings are supposed to compound, your debts are supposed to shrink, and your financial future is supposed to come into focus. Instead, the window slams shut. And suddenly you're 58 years old, unemployed, with $200K saved when you need 5 times that, and nobody's hiring because you're overqualified. This is where the system turns cruel. You've probably heard the narrative, older workers just can't keep up. They don't understand technology. They're stuck in their ways. It's a convenient story. It's also mostly BS. Here's the real reason older workers get targeted in layoffs. They cost more. That's it. That's the tweet. Older workers earn higher wages because they've accumulated experience. They have more expensive health insurance. They qualify for bigger severance packages. And in a system that no longer rewards long-term employment, they're seen as a short-term expense with no long-term upside. Modern companies don't view employees as investments anymore. They view them as units. Units of output, evaluated quarter by quarter, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. In that framework, experience stops being an asset. It becomes a liability. This is especially visible in tech. The industry has exploded over the past 2 decades, but the share of workers over 40? It's been declining. The workforce didn't shrink. It got younger. And when older workers push back, the data backs them up. Age discrimination complaints filed with federal agencies have been rising for years. But here's the genius move. Companies never say they're laying people off because of age. They say they're restructuring, adapting to market conditions, realigning priorities. Age disappears from the language, even as its effects remain crystal clear in the outcomes. And that's how you build a system where older workers are quietly removed. Not because they can't do the job, but because the job has been redesigned to no longer make room for them. All right, if the logic behind targeting older workers still felt abstract, let me make it real for you. Mid-2010s. A series of high-profile layoffs made headlines. Disney, IBM, Other major corporations. The pattern? Workers with decades of service, stellar performance reviews, were suddenly told their jobs were being eliminated. But here's the gut punch. They had to train their replacements before they left, and in some cases, that knowledge transfer was tied to severance eligibility. Meaning, cooperate or lose your financial safety net. Let that sink in. You've given 20, 25, 30 years to a company, and your final task? Teaching someone else how to do your job for a fraction of what you were paid. Imagine the mental gymnastics required to process that. Your knowledge is valuable, so valuable it must be transferred. But you? Disposable. You're acknowledged as an expert and simultaneously discarded as irrelevant. And because severance is often the last thing standing between you and financial catastrophe, mortgage, medical bills, college tuition, you comply, not because you agree, because refusal has immediate, devastating consequences. This is where modern employment shows its true face. Companies talk about culture and family and team, but when it's time to cut costs, decades of institutional memory get reduced to handover meetings and training documents. Long careers end not with gratitude, but with extraction. Your experience is mined like a resource, and once it's been transferred, you're let go. No ceremony, no dignity, just, thanks for the notes. Security will escort you out. This isn't about blaming the people who took those jobs. It's about recognizing the incentives. A system designed to strip value as efficiently as possible, then move on without any responsibility for what or who gets left behind. When economists talk about layoffs, they use clean language. Headcount reduction, workforce optimization, quarterly adjustments. But for older workers, losing a job isn't an abstraction. It's cumulative, personal, often irreversible. Because unemployment late in a career doesn't behave like unemployment at 28. Older job seekers stay unemployed longer. Not because they stop trying, but because the market quietly narrows around them. Interviews become rare. Feedback becomes vague. Rejection becomes silence. What starts as a temporary setback slowly turns into long-term exclusion. And the toll isn't just financial. Chronic stress becomes constant. Sleep deteriorates. Existing health conditions worsen. For those who do stay employed, the pressure intensifies. Teams shrink. Workloads explode. And fear becomes a management tool. People work longer hours, ignore warning signs, push past reasonable limits, not out of ambition, but out of sheer survival. Meanwhile, the financial consequences pile up fast. Late career layoffs interrupt the years when earnings are highest and savings are supposed to accelerate. Instead of paying down debt, workers drain what they've already saved. Instead of preparing for retirement, they're forced to triage. Which bills can wait? Which can't? And the safety net beneath them? Getting thinner by the year. Social Security was never designed to replace a full income. But a growing number of older Americans now expect it to carry most of the weight, and even that isn't guaranteed. Projections warn of reduced benefits in the coming decades. The message is clear. Even the backstop is crumbling. This doesn't just affect one generation, by the way. Gen X workers are sandwiched, supporting aging parents while financing kids who can't find stable jobs. Millennials and Gen Z are watching their parents' loyalty evaporate into disposability. They're learning a lesson in real time. Commitment is dangerous. Security is a myth. Plan for yourself because no one else will. Trust erodes. Motivation changes. Expectations shrink. This is how systems break, not through revolution, but through observation. When people see experience discarded and security dissolve, belief fades. And once belief is gone, the whole social contract starts to unravel. So here we are, massive layoffs, collapsed pensions, a shrinking safety net, all converging at the worst possible moment, right when workers are supposed to transition from earning to resting. And the result? A generation discovering too late that experience no longer protects them. That loyalty no longer buys time. But this story isn't just about older workers. It's about everyone watching it happen. Because when you're 30 and you see someone with 25 years of dedication get tossed aside like yesterday's trash, you adjust your expectations. You stop believing in company loyalty. You stop planning long-term with any single employer. You start viewing work as transactional. Because that's how work is viewing you. And honestly, can you blame them? The system taught this lesson. And younger generations are just responding rationally to the incentives they see. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If retirement security depends entirely on uninterrupted income in an increasingly unstable job market, then the problem isn't individual planning. It's structural design. The question isn't why didn't people save more? The question is, how can a system that depends on human labor function while discarding humans at their most vulnerable stage? Because right now, it can't. The math doesn't work. The incentives don't align. The promise is broken. And the longer we pretend this is about personal responsibility instead of systemic failure, the worse it's going to get. This isn't a story about one generation failing to adapt. It's a story about a system that removed long-term guarantees without replacing them with anything stable. And here's the scariest part. We're still acting like this is normal. Like it's fine that people work for 40 years and end up with nothing. Like it's fine that loyalty gets punished instead of rewarded. Like it's fine that the social contract has been shredded, and we're all just supposed to figure it out on our own. It's not fine. And the fact that we're not collectively losing our minds about this, that's how deeply we've internalized the broken system. If you think conversations like this need to happen more often, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me, have you seen this happening? To yourself, your parents, your coworkers? Let's get a conversation going. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because the more people who understand what's happening, the harder it becomes to ignore. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.